The Elder Scrolls Online takes place long before the events of any of the other Elder Scrolls games, and specifically 700 years before the events of the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Even so, a ton of history already happened in that time to shape the world you'll play in the Morrowind expansion. Here's a short primer to bring you up to speed. Morrowind is now known as the home of the Dunmer, or the Dark Elves, but originally the Dunmer were regular golden-skin elves hailing from the ancestral Elflands to the southwest. Their specific band was known as the Chimer, and they worshipped the mysterious Daedra beings in stark contrast to their elven kin. Eventually, they left the elven homelands under the leadership of the prophet Veloth to settle in the Morrowind region. They built many towers throughout Morrowind, many of which remain visible thousands of years later. The problem was that the area was already inhabited by the elves known as the Dwemer, more colloquially known as the Dwarves. Agnostic and technologically advanced by the standards of the world, the Dwemer sneered at the Chimer Daedra worship. In time, this led to a bitter war between the two cultures. The Viking-like Nords invaded Morrowind to take advantage of the situation. The pressure led the Dwarves and the Chimer to overcome their differences for a bit and form the First Council. Through the friendship of the High Dwemer King Dumak and the Chimer Hotator Induril Nervar, they succeeded in driving out the Nords. Which, of course, allowed the Dwarves and the Chimer to start going at each other's throats again. The renewal of the warfare was likely brought about by the Dwarves' discovery of the Heart of Lorkhan in 1E700, a relic of the divine being responsible for creating the world of the Elder Scrolls that was hidden in the red mounted volcano that dominates the island of Vvardenfell. Using magic, science, and the heart, the Dwarves attempted to make a new god. The tribunal of major Chimer figures, Vivek, Sothasil, and Almalexia, warned them to stop, and war broke out when they refused. Under mysterious circumstances, the Dwarves as an entire race vanished during the heat of the conflict. After the battle, the tribunal used Kargranark's tools to become living gods themselves, which they remain in the Elder Scrolls Online. They told their people to worship them instead of the good-natured Daedra. Angered by this betrayal, Asura turned the entire Chimer race into the Dark Elves, who now have blood-red eyes and darker skin. Some Dunmer refused to worship the tribunal though, and so became the nomadic Ashlanders who wander the north of Vvardenfell. Things were relatively quiet for 2,000 years until a force of serpent-like Tsatski warriors invaded Morrowind from the distant continent of Akavir. Under intense pressure, the tribunal partnered with the growing Second Empire to the south to drive out the threat. By the time 140 years had passed though, relations between the two had deteriorated, and the 80-year-long Fourscore War broke out. Eventually, King Riemann Cyrodiil was assassinated by the Dunmer assassin organisation of the Morag Tong. 572 years later, Morrowind found itself under invasion from the Akaviri again, and the Dunmer partnered with the Nords and the lizard-like Argonians to drive out the force, thus forming what became known as the Ebonheart Pact. Knowing that the Imperial throne to the south was empty, the Alliance put itself forward as one of the contenders for the throne, alongside the Aldmeri Dominion and the Daggerfall Covenant. 11 years later, that's where the events of the Elder Scrolls Online unfold. The events of Morrowind, as in the Elder Scrolls 3, are still far in the future. If you're an Elder Scrolls fan, you might also want to check out our 6 tips for players returning to the Elder Scrolls Online. You might dig my review of the Elder Scrolls CCG Legends, and there's the Morrowind trailer to really whet your appetite for the new expansion.